The NHS is facing its toughest ever start to the year as junior doctors today begin the longest strike in NHS history. The walkout will last for 6 days and is expected to wreak havoc on the health service, with at least 1 in 3 operations cancelled. It comes as the NHS struggles with additional pressures from surging winter viruses, while the impact of the COVID pandemic is still being felt across the sector.
The British Medical Association is demanding a 35% pay rise for junior doctors, which it says would restore real earnings to 2008 levels. But the government says this is unaffordable and has instead offered an extra 3% rise on top of the average 8.8% increase for 2023 to 24.
Joining us now is former Conservative Health Minister. Very pleased to welcome Edwina Currie to the show. Thanks for joining us, Edwina. What is your take on this? I mean, it strikes me that given that, we had that 3-day strike just before Christmas, we've got the longest medical strike in NHS history going on right now, 6 days. And we know these are the most crucial time in the NHS calendar. This is when hospitals, doctors are under the most pressure because of various winter ailments, and it strikes me this is a vicious thing for the junior doctors to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agreed with every word you said in your introduction to this. And bear in mind who is actually suffering. It's not the doctors who are suffering, those people on the picket line there. It's people like me, it's pensioners. Most of the people who go into hospital at this time of year are old people. Most of the people who have complex conditions that make them much more vulnerable during the winter are old people. Most of the patients you ever see in the NHS, particularly the inpatients, are old people. And they're in no position to stand up to those doctors, but they are the ones who are going to be wheeled across these awful picket lines in order to get the care and treatment in hospital that they need. I think these junior doctors should reflect on everything that you said and everything that is being said about them. Their basic rate, their absolutely basic rate in the very, very first year of training immediately out of college is over £32,000. They can go up on the scale to about twice of that. If they're in London or places like Dorking in Surrey, then they get an extra £5,000 London waiting. If they're in a specialty area, they want to train as a GP, or for example, in emergency medicine, they can get another £9,000 on top of that, and that's before they've done a single extra hour. So this idea that they're underpaid and overworked is actually not true. If they're working longer hours, they're actually way, way, way above the basic rate. So they're not that badly off. And as you have said, they've already received 9% for the current year. There's another 3% on offer. Together, that comes to about the figure that the people in Scotland, the BMA in Scotland, have accepted, and the BMA has praised as a success up there. What's the difference? Well, guess what? The SNP runs the health service in Scotland, and the Tories run the one in England. And that, I think that's exactly what is happening. The BMA members.
It's interesting listening to you talk about how pensioners are going to be the worst affected during these strikes. And of course, during COVID, we're all told to stay at home to save Granny's life. We're asking doctors to go to work to do much the same. But I suppose what they would say, and what they do often say now, is if you're a practicing medic, there's an international marketplace for you, particularly, I suppose, if you've received medical training in the UK and therefore you're quite a high-valued commodity. And that they would say, well, what's going to stop us instead moving to somewhere like Australia, where it's sunny and we'll get paid more? On that note, should we be perhaps heeding their warning? Should we make sure that they have to stay and practice in the NHS after training here for a certain period of time? Should we even go as far as legislating against doctors from striking?
I would like to see the minimum level of service that has been proposed by the government actually put into action. And what that would mean is that many of the people on the picket line now would not be entitled to be striking in those circumstances. Let's just remind ourselves that there may be junior doctors now, but the opportunity is there for them to become consultants, if they're any good, in this country. And that means that they would be well above the pay scales that we're talking now, and they'd be the best paid people in the NHS. As for the idea that you train some people and they go abroad, I think the way to do that is to say, you know what, if you train in the UK, with some of the best medical training in the world, and the NHS, which is so widely admired, you have to stay here for 5 years after you have finished your training. If, on the other hand, I venture to suggest you're the kind of person who money is the most important thing about being a doctor, well, then you're probably out on the picket line right now, and you don't care about the patients, not a jot, not a jot. If you care about the patients, you will be working here. You will be on the wards now, looking after the people who really need you.
Yeah, the thing is, Edwina, you look at these picket lines, these doctors standing in front of the hospitals, and in the hospitals behind them, it is very fair to speculate that patients are literally dying because those doctors aren't treating them. And therefore, let's go back to this point. Now, to be fair to the other elements of the medical profession, the consultants, the junior doctors in Scotland and the nurses, I suspected they were all doing this politically as well, but they all settled, as I said, with the spirit of compromise. These junior doctors won't. And surely in this country, there are professions that aren't allowed to go on strike. The police, prison officers, the army, all because people could die if they did go on strike. Why are doctors allowed to go on strike when people die because of their strikes? If they're going to carry on like this, we have to stop them, don't we?
Well, I suspect it's partly because the legislation hasn't quite caught up. I was married to a long-serving police officer, and you're absolutely right. They had lost the right to strike after incidents during the First World War. They went on strike. Would you believe that? So that got stopped. And I think we need to catch up a little bit with that. But my own feeling is that we should really be appealing to people's good nature. And if somebody wants to be a doctor, you have to hope that if they've gone through all that medical training and they're now in training in a hospital dealing with patients, that is actually something that touches their conscience, that they actually want to help people, not that they put money as their first objective. Maybe we're just not recruiting the right people into medical school. Maybe we recruit people for their brains and that, in fact, they've been to top schools and that sort of thing, and they see themselves as successes, and they measure success in terms of money. That's not how success is really measured when you're in the caring professions. What it's measured in is how you look after people. And I would take issue, it's not just a question of death rates. We have been seeing excess death rates recently. It's about suffering. It's about the people who are not getting the cancer tests that they should be, or the treatment that they should be. It's about the people who come in for some minor issue, and actually when they're checked out, they've got some major issue there. That's the kind of problem that we're really facing. And it seems to me that those people on that picket line, those trade union activists on that picket line, they couldn't care a toss about ordinary people, the ones that, we're the taxpayers as well. We've paid for them to be trained, and they're needed there. They're there for a reason.
Yeah.
I mean, what they often say, though, is we have to work in an environment that is incredibly difficult. You have to treat people in storage cupboards. There aren't enough hospital beds. Is the problem not perhaps that for too long now the NHS has been extremely poorly managed? We've had a cap on the training of the number of medics we have in this country. It's an outdated model that, frankly, isn't fit for purpose in the 21st century. And actually, if things were run like they run in the private sector, or the European model, as I got to enjoy when I lived in Belgium, doctors might want to stay and work in it.
Yeah, well, that's because you think like that because you're young. You wait till you're 77, or if you get some chronic disease like leukemia for which you can't be insured, and you might just feel a little differently. No, I don't think changing the model of the NHS is the issue. I think it has failed to adapt to the fact that we are an elderly population, and that is going to mean far more longer stays and chronic illnesses and that sort of thing. And that what we really need to do is ramp up outside the hospital so that we can get people out of hospital quickly, get them cared for in their own homes, or just begin to accept, that care homes are good places. It's only recently they've been inspected, for heaven's sake, and really ramp up the status and the esteem in which we hold care workers. Train up the people in the families rather more. There's a whole host of things we should do outside, and I think that would reduce bed blocking. In many areas, that's already happening. It certainly happens in Derbyshire, where I live, and I have to say I pay tribute to all the people that work outside the NHS and do a cracking good job.
OK, Edwina, bear with us. We're going to play an interview with a striking doctor now, and while you watch this with us, ponder the question I was planning to ask you, which is this. If you were the Health Secretary now, what would you be doing to sort this mess out? But let's listen to the doctor first.
Well, the fact of the matter is that no other first world country in the world actually pays its doctors £15 an hour. We're asking for £21 an hour. Is that really unreasonable for a doctor with so many skills?
Let's forget that question. What would you be doing to sort this situation out right now if you were the Health Secretary?
Well, there are several things that they can't do, that the ministers can't do. The first is, as you hinted earlier, they cannot give in to strikes. If you give in to strikes, then all you do is encourage more strikes. And I don't think they can give in to anything like the pay demand that is still on the table. You know, a year or so ago, when we had inflation at 10% and rising, then it did look as if we were going to have to pay much higher levels. That's no longer the case. Inflation is well down. People have adjusted to the level of prices, and we've just seen a record Christmas, for example. So I think that their demands are unacceptable, and ministers have to continue to say that. What I would do if I was Rishi Sunak is I would not change health ministers again. It takes a while to get your head around all the complex issues in that very big department. The NHS is one of the biggest employers in the world. It ranks not far behind Indian Railways and the Red Army. You know, we're talking about millions and millions of people directly employed, or ancillary workers, or in the care services and so on. And that's probably the way it's going to have to continue. It's also going to have to continue to be well-financed and well-led. Somewhere along the line, management, I think, has turned out to be a bit wobbly in many of these places. And that includes the senior people, the senior doctors, the senior managers. They need to create a positive environment in which those who work in the NHS feel that they are valued and important, not by looking at their pay packets, but by looking the smiles on the faces of those people that they're able to help and whose pain they are able to relieve.
Edwina, thank you so much for joining us.